gives me my great pleasure to introduce to you now Joe Hayman, who's the Chief Executive of the PSHE Association. So I'm sure you'll make him feel very welcome.
Thanks, Karen. As Karen said, I'm Joe Hayman, Chief Executive of the PSHE Association, and I'm delighted to be here today and delighted that so many of you were able to join us for this occasion. Unfortunately, you've got me speaking today rather than any government ministers. We did ask, but they weren't available. I'm relatively new in post, but my colleague John Dillon, who's at the back and who's organised most of today, told me that in years gone past, we've written a message which we've asked ministers to sort of put their names to, and that's got us off to a good start to the day. Last year we had Nick Gibb, who's the schools minister, but this year, because I'm new and I wanted to make a good impression, I thought, why don't we go for the big one? We'll go for Michael Gove. Easy. I'm going backwards. Ministerial statement from the Right Honourable Michael Gove MP. Dear PSHE Association conference delegates, I'm extremely sorry I can't be with you today, but I wish you all the best for what I hope will be a stimulating and invigorating conference. I must admit that I didn't start off as a huge fan of PSHE education, but I must say that I've come round to it in the last 6 months. Why the sudden conversion, you may ask? There are many reasons, but perhaps the biggest has been the introduction of Joe Hayman as Chief Executive of the PSHE Association. What? His youthful dynamism and insightful tweets have convinced me that PSHE education is a cause worth fighting for. John, were we meant to run this by the DFE before we put it out? I'm sure they'll be fine with it. Secretary of State goes on, in fact, I've had a complete change of heart around my entire education policy based on Hayman's powerful argument that education should prepare pupils for life, not just for exams. That's good, isn't it? So I can today announce that I'm abandoning curriculum reform, exam reform, and the academies programme. And as for free schools, what was I thinking? They will all be put under local authority control by the end of the year. Hey. Gove's colleague Elizabeth Truss added, I'm delighted at the Secretary of State's statement on the value of PSHE education. We will expect schools to make space for it in their timetables by reducing maths lessons. Who needs maths anyway, she added. The kids all have calculators on their mobile phones, don't they? Liz Truss, just so you're aware, is the PSHE minister and a big fan of maths, so there goes our DFE funding. Colleagues, I've not only misrepresented ministers of the Crown this morning, but I've also set up a false dichotomy there. PSHE should not replace maths, it should complement it. We should be ambitious for our schools, that they should both support academic learning and personal development, acknowledging that the two go hand in hand. Why is this so important? Well, we live in one of the most advanced and diverse countries in the world at a time of massive global change, where power is shifting and is becoming more fragmented, and where old guarantees of continually improving living standards no longer apply. It is against that backdrop that Britain is raising its next generation, a generation made up of some children who will live to see the 22nd century. What will the future hold for them? How can we help them prepare for that future? That's where all of us in our various roles come in. While we all have different roles, I have no doubt that we share a view that education must be about the preparation for life, not just for exams. That the school must be a supportive partner to families and communities in helping to prepare children for their lives beyond the classroom. By taking on a role in PSHE education, we all implicitly take on that responsibility. You should be proud of that, in my view. I'm certainly proud to have joined this community. As I'm new to the sector, let me tell you a bit about me and where I think I and the association can fit in the future. I'm not a teacher. I started my career as a civil servant working for the Youth Justice Board on initiatives to prevent young people getting involved in crime. I remember being at the Youth Justice Board in 2005 during the Comprehensive Spending Review and how disappointed we were when we only received an extra 50 million of additional investment in the programme I ran. Only 50 million. It was 8 years ago, but it might have been a lifetime. I left the YJB for an education charity called Continue, where I led our work on the extended schools agenda. It was the dying days of the Labour government, and every school ministers had dictated had to be an extended school. We worked with colleagues from what was then called the TDA to provide intensive support, regional networks, cross-government working groups were chaired by the DFE or the DCSF as it was then. The department put a huge amount of money into the programme and linked initiatives like the disadvantage subsidy. They monitored everything meticulously as we got to 99.4% of schools, 99.6% of schools, 99.7%, 99.8%. Shortly before the election, we reached 100% of schools. But in the wash-up, the successor to extended schools, 21st century schools, was lost, alongside statutory PSHE education. I left Continue to publish a book, British Voices, a look at Britain from the perspective of ordinary people. Copies of the book are on sale today, and any proceeds... Hang on. Any proceeds we sell today will go towards the association. Yes, I'm a self-publicist, but not that much. It was 2011 when I wrote the book, and things didn't seem quite right in Britain. I wanted to get out into the country and talk to people to try to find out why. By pure coincidence, I began my research in August 2011, the same month as the riots swept across our inner cities. It was in that context I interviewed people across the country, young and old, rich and poor, about what was going well and not going so well in Britain. I had the most fantastic experience, but came back more worried about the country. In particular, the struggle to make sense of a changing world came through again and again and again. Someone I met while I was in Northern Ireland talked about a feeling, stop the world, we want to get off. And I think what he meant was that people didn't want things to change, or perhaps the speed of change was just too much for them to cope with. Yet deep down, I think the people I met knew that the change was inevitable. In the age of globalization and new technology, I think they understood that no one, even the most powerful leaders, could hold the change back. The challenge, it seemed to me, was not to resist change, but rather to equip people, and young people in particular, with the skills and attributes to thrive in the changing world. You see, I was coming back to PSHE. And that, for me, is where my passion for PSHE education started. Because for me, that's what PSHE is all about. Yes, we start with the topics which make PSHE famous or infamous, depending on who you are. Today we'll talk about pornography, sexting, FGM, body image, and so we should. These are some of the most pressing concerns of our age. Children, parents, and communities are united in wanting schools to play their part in addressing these concerns. This is about helping children to keep themselves safe, and nothing could be more important than that. But where I get really excited is when we use topics such as those that we've discussed today to help children to develop the skills and attributes to deal with whatever life throws at them, both challenges and opportunities. I'm talking about the ability to make sense of a world around you on the basis of limited, contradictory, and sometimes misleading information. The ability, in turn, to analyse risk and opportunity, the capacity, when weighing up a choice, to know yourself, to understand your own emotions, fallibilities, and prejudices, to acknowledge them and to treat them appropriately. And from that, the ability to manage the moments and make the choices that define all of our lives. The context will change faster and faster and faster, so will the topics we cover. But those skills and attributes we help children to develop will last a lifetime. They will be the hallmarks of the resilient, thriving citizens in the resilient, thriving society we all want to help to build. In that context, I'm of course deeply disappointed that ministers of all political persuasions have chosen not to guarantee PSHE education for every child in this country. Most recently, of course, at the conclusion of this year's PSHE review. And while I was thinking about what I should say about the PSHE review, my mind went back to my colleague Nick Boddington, who many of you will know. Nick introduced me to a book called Not Now, Bernard, and I'm sure a number of you know that book. And for those who don't, it's a book about a young boy who tries to get his parents' attention to tell them about monsters in their garden, but no one will listen. I guess in our respective roles, we all feel a little bit like Bernard sometimes when we talk about PSHE education. So I guess part of my role as someone who's new to this community is to take a step back, and to ask whether we're being reasonable in seeking a statutory entitlement to PSHE education, or whether the politicians who've knocked us back over the years are correct that the entitlement is not needed. Colleagues, let me tell you, we are right. Too many teachers are left to deal with the kind of critical topics we'll be discussing today without sufficient training or time on the curriculum to do them justice. There is a direct connection between whether a subject is statutory, the amount of initial teacher training that is provided, and the incentive for schools to give that subject time on the curriculum. Two of the biggest weaknesses flagged in Ofsted's recent PSHE report, which Janet's going to speak about in a moment. A huge risk, a monster in the garden if you like, is that children will miss out on the support on these critical issues because teachers feel uncomfortable with them due to a lack of training or pressures to fulfill statutory obligations mean that senior leadership teams don't feel that they can give the time on the curriculum to address these issues properly. But the bigger risk, the biggest monster in the garden, in my view, is that we will fail to equip children to thrive in the modern world and to take advantage of the many opportunities that they will have as they grow up. An education system which supports pupils' academic achievement but does not enable them to fulfill their potential socially and economically would be an abject failure of those children, particularly since we know how important soft skills are now, not just in our personal lives, but in our work lives too. That's why we'll never give up on statutory PSHE education. And I say this with colleagues from the DFE in the room. Good people who I enjoy working with a great deal, but they know our position very clearly. We were set up to see PSHE education made statutory, and we won't give up until it is. But colleagues, I want to tell you something else. The fact that PSHE is not yet good enough, according to Ofsted's report, is not simply the responsibility of the Department for Education, and making it statutory would not solve all of our problems. Far from it, in fact. Remember I told you about my involvement in the Extended Schools programme, a big national target set by ministers, pursued relentlessly by the department and its agencies, with huge amounts of money poured in. 3 years on, how many schools are still extended schools? Yes, there will be reasons. Funding has been cut, key posts have been lost. But I also wonder whether in all of the schools which ticked the extended schools box in 2011 really had the teachers, the senior leadership teams, the governors all on board and were truly committed to that agenda. Not all of them, I would bet. Government commitment is just one piece in the puzzle. And that's why I want us to embark on a journey with schools to look at what the future holds for PSHE education. Because it's all very well for my colleagues and I to sit in our offices in London and to come up with detailed programs of learning for children, deciding what we believe every child in the country should know and what the evidence tells us works in PSHE education. But that has to meet somewhere with the reality that schools are facing. Otherwise, they will reject what we come up with. No one is going to force schools to deliver PSHE, and nor would we want it foisted upon schools against their will. So we have to come up with models and approaches which work for schools. The DFE's position gives us space to do so, to work together with no concern about politics getting in the way. There is a chance we could see this as an opportunity as well as a challenge. So in future, our models of support for PSHE education will be developed collaboratively with schools. Having a conversation with 22,000 schools across the country is hard. It's easier to take aim at the Department for Education to say, why don't they just sort it out? But the responsibility we take on by joining the PSHE community means that we owe it to the children we serve to do everything we can in the circumstances we face to raise standards in PSHE education, to find ways to get more time for the subjects on timetables across the country, to get more training for teachers in spite of the difficult context. So let me be clear in our position. We will do everything in our power to get a statutory entitlement to PSHE education, which we believe every child deserves, and we are in it for the long haul. But we will not simply spend our time throwing rocks at the Department for Education. Instead, we will talk to partners, Ofsted, other government departments and agencies, local authorities, teaching unions, academy chains, faith school networks, ITT providers, voluntary sector partners and corporates to develop partnerships and to raise money so that we can improve the quality of PSHE education across the country. There are people in all of those sectors who care about PSHE education just as much as we do. Just read, for example, Janet Palmer's report, which she's just about to talk us through. It reads like the work of someone who cares passionately about PSHE education, because she does. These are the kind of relationships that I want to build, and I'm delighted to have so many partners and potential partners here today. But most importantly, we need to talk to schools, to think about what works for them, to develop models and approaches which combine our knowledge of best practice with their experience. We will shortly be releasing a PSHE program of study to help PSHE coordinators to plan provision for next year. And then we will begin a more detailed conversation with schools, or at least we hope to, about how a future model of PSHE education should develop. We will also be more in touch with you about the issues which are concerning you, such as those on the agenda today. We know, for example, that mental health and special educational needs are two big areas where you want more support. We will be looking to find out more about the kind of help that you need, and then looking to find partners and to raise money to get you that help. We will be looking for local authorities, school networks, academy chains who see the value of PSHE education and for whom we can provide support at reduced bulk rates. I'm delighted to have Karen Monteith from Portsmouth City Council here today, with whom we just signed an important contract to raise standards of PSHE education across the city. We hope other authorities will follow that example. And over the year ahead, we will also be doing more to raise the quality of PSHE resources, both by developing new materials and by kite marking existing resources. I have to say that since coming into post, I've been deeply concerned about some of the organisations seeking to go into PSHE classes and providing misinformation about, for example, sexual orientation and abortion, or who have been using drug education as a route into influencing children's religious views. Those who provide false information in PSHE education should not be allowed near our schools, and we will be doing all that we can to prevent that from happening. From next term, we'll be updating our guidance to schools on working with external contributors, and we will only be publicising resources and organisations which have developed quality assurance in line with our evidence of best practice. These are just some of the ways that we are going to serve you in the year ahead, but I want to use this conference to identify more ways. 2 years ago, we were funded, 72% of our funding came from the Department for Education. Soon that will be zero. As we move away from funding from central government, our long-term sustainability depends on meeting your needs, and so it should. We are your association. We exist to serve you. We need to find out how best we can do so. I'm going to hand over to Janet in a moment, but one final message from me. I mentioned the book Not Now, Bernard, Alyssa earlier on, and suggested in our various roles, we may all feel like the important things we're saying are not always heard. My message to you, if you ever feel like that, is to remember that you are part of a big national community working with a common aim, and to have absolute confidence that we as a community are right. My confidence comes from constantly reminding myself why I work in this sector. Britain's children are growing up in one of the most diverse, freest societies in the world in a time of huge social, economic, and technological change. To survive and thrive in this context, children and young people need the skills to make the right choices for themselves, to manage the moments, and to make the decisions which will define their lives. In the new world, no one is going to put anything on the plate for young people, but we can help them to develop those skills and attributes to make their own way in the world. In partnership with their families, their peers, their communities, you are supporting children to develop those skills and attributes. Your work serves not only individual children and young people, but also our society as a whole. So never let anyone make you doubt the importance of that work, and never forget that your national association is here to help you every step of the way. Thank you.